Once a troubled visitor comes to a synagogue and informs everyone there that he's there to see a rabbi for a very important reason. He has a need, an urgent need that needs to be resolved. So they tell him, sure, we can arrange this. You could see a rabbi in just a little while. He will speak to you, and don't worry, we're certain that he will give you some words of wisdom that will help you resolve your situation. But the visitor insists, the only rabbi I want to see is a one-handed rabbi. And everyone at the synagogue kind of shrugged their shoulders and say, now, why would you want to see a one-handed rabbi? He says, you don't understand. I've already come with this problem to rabbis before. And they all say, on one hand, on the other hand, I want to see a one-handed rabbi. Hopefully you will understand my joke and why I am doing this, why I'm opening my drash this way a little later. But I might do a little bit of two-handed rabbi with you today. So as we continue to read the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, it keeps numbering. That's what Numbers does, right? So we kind of get used to this by now. And Nasso, actually, the verb is a command. It means take account, literally. And this time, the count is all about the Levites. It's the Levitical families that are being counted in Nasso. So in Numbers chapter 4, which is what I'm going to be focusing on, and specifically on verses 47 and 48, if you want to follow along, we learned that in total, there were 8,580 Levites that were involved in disassembling, carrying, and reassembling the Mishkan, the tabernacle. You remember, one of the primary jobs of Levites in the Midbar, in the wilderness, as the tabernacle was a movable tent, was to take care of that sanctuary, to assemble it and disassemble it. Obviously, as the real temple was built, that need kind of fell away. They still had plenty of duties to take care of the facilities, but at least they didn't have to take it apart and set it up altogether. But at this time, that's what they were doing. And so when we talk about 8,580 men, we're talking about 8,580 men that are between the ages of 30 and 50. So these were nice, strong, able-bodied people who could actually do the physical work of taking it apart and putting it back together. As I was reading this passage, an unusual phrase caught my attention. And I wanted to share this with you. So Torah summarizes the duties of this particular group of Levites by saying in verse 47 and 48 right there, this phrase. It says that their job was to la'avod, avodat, avodah, ve'avodat masa, ba'ohel moed. I will translate this literally. To work the work of service and the work of doing in the tent of meeting. Now, my question, of course, to you is, do you hear anything strange in that phrase at all? Because if you're reading the English translations just kind of smooth this all out, and you will not see in the translation what one is obviously seeing in Hebrew. We have a simple term right here, avodah, that occurs 4 times in a row. The sentence actually uses the same word 4 times in a row, one after another, switching between nouns and verbs, but still the same exact verb, the same exact noun. Listen to this. La'avod, avodat, avodah, ve'avodat masa. Do you hear that? 4 times. The same exact word just keeps repeating. And of course, the play of words that I'm trying to point to is understandable for those who understand what that word means. And the word means work, but it also means service, as in worship of God. There's a double meaning in that word, and people who study Hebrew, people who read it in Hebrew, understand that sometimes you will read this word and it will have that idea of more of a work that you need to perform, something that you actually do, and at other times it's more along the side of spiritual service. So, 2 meanings all together right here, but they're strung up in this chain. So the phrase stood out for me because I'm not aware of English ever doing something like that. So this is a little bit unique for me. And what I realized looking closer at this phrase, that there's actually two phrases there. The words are coupled together. There are two phrases that describe the work of the Levites. One phrase, avodat avodah, and that's a type of work or service that they are supposed to do. And the other one is avodat masah. So you have actually two sets out of those words. And if I lost you in my Hebrew explanations, I'm sorry, I apologize. I find this stuff exciting, so I feel like I can share this. Let me get to the wisdom that I see in these two phrases, something that perhaps all of us can apply to our lives together. So I have a couple of points that I wanted to make. There's two kinds of laborers that I see, and I got 2 points. First point, know who you really work for. And that's kind of a statement, but also a question. Do you know who you really work for? I talk to people and I encounter all sorts of attitudes towards jobs and occupations and work that people do. I find it fascinating because I discover that among these different perspectives that people have about their job and employment, for example, some people see themselves working for a boss. Like, I work for a boss. That's why I show up to work, because I work for that man in that office with a window, okay? Other people say, I work for a company. I work for such and such corporation, because they actually don't have a relationship with their boss. It's just a person there. So they say, I work for this company that I'm really behind. Other people say, even go further, and they say, I really work for a noble cause. There's this mission. There's this lofty vision that this company has that embraces, and that's really what I am working for. That's why I do what I do. Now, some employees actually have a completely different way of looking at this. You know, I work for myself, is what they say, even if they work for a business, because the way they look at this, working for any business, they are doing it because this is just a means to an end. They just want to earn a living so that they can support their family, so they can take care of the ones that they love. So they really are working for themselves. And the fact that they're working for somebody else's business is just a matter of circumstances. And that's a valid way to think about it. So there are different perspectives that people take when it comes to labor and employment. Now, because I do what I do, I often think of myself working for the people. So think about my occupation for a second. Now, on one hand, that is exactly what I do. But on the other hand, I really work for God. Think about it. The reason why I do what I do is because I want to serve Hashem. But the way that He wants me to serve Him is by serving His people. So you see my one hand, other hand dilemma right here. So as I consider this issue, this was the situation with Levites, and this might be a situation with you. This could be the fact. Now, you don't have to be a Levite to choose to do any work as unto Hashem. You know that. This is a spiritual principle of Torah that is applicable in such a broad and expensive way that pretty much anyone can take that upon themselves and actually benefit from this in their life. Because you don't have to be a Levite to be this. Shaul taught this principle of Torah to his disciples in a city of Colossae, which is not a very Jewish city. And this is what he said. Whatever you do, do your work heartily, as for the Lord and not for people, knowing that it is from the Lord that you will receive the reward of inheritance. You hear that? Now that was Shaul teaching Torah to people who really don't know Torah, but it's the same exact principle. Working for Hashem. So that's my first point. You know who you really work for? If you do, you're a blessed person. My second point is this. Don't let your job define you too much. You know, it's okay to allow yourself to be defined by your job. A lot of times we choose occupations because of that's where our propensity lies to. It's like I've always been a teacher, an educator. I've discovered this in my life. Why? Because I love to teach. And so I always think of myself, my identity, actually, partially as a teacher, because that's what I love. I teach. So I see myself as a teacher. And a lot of times, that job has defined me. That's what I've been doing for many years of my life. And that's not a terrible thing, to define yourself through whatever occupation that you've chosen. But letting your job define you too much, if you allow that, you might lose sight of who you really work for. You see? That will start to define you too much. That's my first point, remember? Now, in Torah, the sons of Kohat, they were to carry the Ark of the Covenant, and they were to carry all the furniture which was in the Mishkan. That was a really amazing holy duty. So that's one particular Levitical family. Now, the sons of Gershon were to carry the cloths and all the textiles and all the coverings of the tent. That was their job. The clan of Merari, their family, they were to take care of the poles, the beams, the sockets, the frame of the tent, basically the entire structure. They were to take it apart and to carry it. Those were their jobs. Now, on one hand, and there I go again, the types of the labor that Torah describes as we read this passage in Bamidbar do not seem to be very glorious. Okay? They get to carry things back and forth. They get to tear up and set up, and it doesn't seem to be glorious. Now, on one hand, this is how it is. On the other hand, only the Levites are allowed to do this labor that we would consider hard, menial labor, carrying things back and forth, building things, unbuilding things, putting it together and doing it and moving it and doing it again and again and again. But only Levites were allowed to do this. Why? Because the Ochel Moed, the tent of meeting, was holy. And all of its components were holy. So on the other hand, this is not a mundane job. It actually is a job of a very high importance and honor. So whatever your job is today, if you know who you really work for, and do what you do with a worshipful attitude as unto Hashem, then the exact tasks that you actually perform do not truly define you. And I hope you realize that. If you know who you really work for, then what you do becomes not that important. The Levites were not porters. They were not movers of the tabernacle. Don't look at them that way. One can see that on one hand, that is the task what they did. They just moved stuff. They were glorified movers. But on the other hand, they were God's servants. And only they were allowed to even touch these holy objects. And this is the connection that I want you to make in your life and in your job. On one hand, the tasks that we are called to perform may be called avodat masah, the service of doing, the task of actually performing something. On the other hand, the second work that I see in this passage that is being described is avodat avodah, and I call that the service of service or the service of worship. And I realize that these are just the same words used in a row, so we have to figure out what in the world do they mean. Any work that we do can be worshipful. It can be a service. Even the simplest of tasks, if we do them with the right heart and we do them for Hashem. So, for example, just recently we celebrated Shavuot under the stars on our synagogue lawn, and it was a lot of fun. And what was amazing is I love how many people in our community, after we were done, just picked up and helped carry things. People just cleaned up. They carried away the tables, the food, everything got put away. And so as we study late into the night, and, it gets into midnight hours, and we realize that most of the stuff has been cleaned up because everybody kind of jumped in and helped out a little bit. And you may not see this as anything important, but this little cleanup event, that was the work for Hashem because it needed to be done. And this is your tent. You don't have to be a Levite to tend to your tent. So I call that doing a service for Hashem. Volunteers come here all the time, every week, and they choose to clean the synagogue on their own time. Guess what? They're not cleaners. They're like Levites. They're Hashem's servants. That's how I see them. So they do this because they do this for the Lord. Because this building is their tent. So apply this to your life in the way that anything that you do, as long as you know who you work for and why you're doing this, do not allow your labor, the actual physical activity, to define you, because in the end, you are serving Hashem.